It feels like every single week at this point, it's the running back position that changes the most for me in the top 30. I mean, we've obviously got Christian McCaffrey always at number 1. Number 2, starting to get more solidified, but past that, it's a wild card. Anybody could be in the top 3 at this point as far as running backs go. But it's important to nail it down. I do running back rankings every single week, and for the fantasy playoffs, it's that much more important. So today, I am getting into the top 30 running backs for Week 16 fantasy football. And I'm doing everything I can to help you guys win a fantasy football championship. So please go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. So obviously, like I said, number 1, it's Christian McCaffrey. I mean, what is there to really discuss other than the fact that this guy is, if the NFL is honest, this is what I will say. Christian McCaffrey should be an MVP contention right there with Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott. Lamar Jackson, you can argue with me. Christian McCaffrey definitely deserves to be in MVP contention. This guy has been an absolute animal this year. I mean, this guy, you can see on the screen, 20 touchdowns already heading into Week 16. McCaffrey's been an animal. There's just no other way around it. So matchup versus the Ravens, I don't care. Give me Christian McCaffrey. Kyren Williams at number 2 versus the New Orleans Saints. Like I said, he's really kind of starting to solidify his place as number 2. He's been an animal. I mean, the past several games, over 100 yards rushing, easily eclipsing that. Obviously, last week playing the Commanders, it's like, well, that's bound to happen, right? Against the Ravens a couple weeks ago, was that supposed to happen? Kyren Williams has been excellent. 19.5 fantasy points per game. This guy's got 11 touchdowns. And by the way, don't forget, he was placed on IR earlier this year. So he missed time. Kyren Williams has been an absolute freak show. And one of the biggest shocks to me, if not the very biggest, of all of 2023. Raheem Mostert and, yes, Rachaad White at number 4. Raheem Mostert taking on the Dallas Cowboys at home, and Rachaad White taking on the Jaguars at home. Raheem Mostert, to start off with him, I remember a couple months back, or not a couple months, but a couple weeks back, when I was ranking Raheem Mostert, you know, with Devon Etienne, a lot of people were like, there's no way that he finishes this high with Etienne. It's like, well, early in the season, he was having great success with Etienne. Now, with Etienne again, he's having great success again. Raheem Mostert is a top 3 back when Devon Etienne is there. Versus the Cowboys this week, we can discuss whether this matchup is good or not. But you know what James Cook just did last week? Over 200 all-purpose yards. Yeah, James Cook lit them on fire. So what's to say that Raheem Mostert can't do that? I'm not saying he's pulling a James Cook. I think Dallas' defense actually, I've been saying this for a long time, matches up well with the Miami Dolphins. But it just goes to show what his ceiling is at 17.5 fantasy points per game. You can't bench Raheem Mostert. Number 3. And number 4, he's getting the respect he deserves. I've been hearing about this for a solid month. In what I got right, what I got wrong live stream, I admitted I was wrong about this one. Rachaad White is a great fantasy football back. This guy, 14.5 fantasy points per game. I still can't get behind the lack of efficiency. But there's no question, he handles all the work. And this guy is a good receiving back. So Rachaad White absolutely gets his respect in a very, very good matchup here. The 2 Lions running backs at 5 and 6. Montgomery, 1 spot above at Minnesota, and then Jahmyr Gibbs. So at this point, we could definitely have a conversation about which one of these 2 deserves to be ahead of the other. So the reason I prefer David Montgomery is because his workload is very solidified. You could see on the screen 16 carries per game opposed to Jahmyr Gibbs 11.5. So Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, is the bigger play threat. You could see that on the screen as well. 5.7 yards per carry. Unreal. This guy's averaging 8 yards per reception. David Montgomery, at most, you can see on the screen, about 2 targets a game. So they're extremely similar in a lot of ways because they're both running behind a top 3 offensive line in the NFL, and they both have their own way of bringing the fantasy value. I think Gibbs' ceiling is a little bit higher, probably about 3 to 4 points higher, but I would say that Gibbs' floor is about 3 to 4 points lower than Montgomery's. So they're very evenly matched. Take your pick. I don't have a problem with what you go with. I do prefer Montgomery just a little bit over Jahmyr Gibbs this week against the Minnesota Vikings. James Cook, welcome into the top 10. I am so happy to be able to rank him confidently here. I've been calling James Cook a league-winning player for weeks now. I've been saying that you can go back to my last buy low video. The last one I did this year, I said James Cook has a legit shot to be a league-winning guy. And it came through last week against Dallas. So this week against the Chargers, give me the friggin' matchup. James Cook, numbers on the screen don't speak for what he's doing recently. Ever since they fired Ken Dorsey, 20 plus opportunities per game. Last week, obviously, lit the world on fire with those 20 plus opportunities. James Cook is a must-start player. Make no mistake, start him over Austin Eckler. Start him over Alvin Kamara at number 8. Although I love Alvin Kamara, I definitely don't love him as much as I do James Cook this week. Because Alvin Kamara, while the matchup is great against the Rams, I've been saying this for weeks, this offense is a train wreck. It's a disaster of an offense. So I don't have a lot of confidence as far as how this offense performs on a week-to-week basis, even against a bad Rams defense. But one thing you can't argue with, workload. 14.5 carries per game and 7 targets per game leads to almost 17 fantasy points per game. Kamara is a great option in week 16 fantasy football. Etienne at number 9. And he's taking on the Cowboys at home. The story with Etienne is a rocky one, but a one with extremely high upside, right? Like Etienne, obviously you know the upside is. That's why he's averaging 17.5 fantasy points per game. But at the same time, last 2 weeks, they haven't been ceiling games. He hasn't found the end zone. Now, the good thing that we've learned about Etienne over the past several weeks is his floor is not that low. 9 to 12 fantasy points the past several weeks, depending on the scoring format. So his floor is not that low, which makes me feel relatively confident ranking him. But he's injured again. He didn't practice on Wednesday, so it's like, this is a problem here for sure. Etienne is simply not built for a massive workload. This guy is not even 190 pounds. Etienne, I've got my problems with him, but I still love the upside, which is why he's still in the top 10, especially over Bijan Robinson, who I had to put at number 10 over Kenneth Walker. But I got to be honest here, man. Bijan Robinson taking on the Colts this week at home, and Kenneth Walker taking on the Titans in Tennessee. Bijan Robinson, what is there to say that we don't already feel? He decapitated several fantasy teams last week, including one of mine. Negative points against the Panthers. Are you kidding me? Disgraceful. It's a disgrace. And I do think that I said this on Wednesday night in my live stream. I can look past it because he's such an elite player. He is elite. Don't let the bad games fool you. This guy is an elite fantasy football player. The problem is workload consistency, and there's been a couple games where he himself has not looked very good. Against the Colts this week, I'm willing to overlook it because I just trust him a little bit more than I trust Kenneth Walker. Obviously, Kenneth Walker came back, showed the ceiling that he had at the beginning of the year. That's what I wanted to see. So I'm very encouraged, and that's why I've been saying it leading up to the week. He's a wild card for me this week. He shot way up in the rankings, obviously at number 11. Look back to last week to see where he was ranked. This is a high ranking for him. I can't fully trust it yet because I don't know if they're just going to go back to giving him, the 16 carry per game type of metric, or if they're going to say, we're going to split it up a little bit more. That was just a game script thing. That's what I worry about. It's similar to Bijan Robinson, which is why I do prefer Bijan over him, because I think if you take out that last game, overall, their floors are about the same and their ceilings are right around the same as well. So Kenneth Walker, great matchup. Still having a little bit of trust issues there, though. Saquon Barkley at 12 and Joe Mixon at 13. Saquon this week taking on the Eagles in Philadelphia, and Joe Mixon taking on the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Listen, Saquon Barkley, like, on paper, this matchup doesn't sound good. The matchup's actually very good. Philadelphia just got thrashed by Kenneth Walker. They've been weak defensively lately. It's not a bad matchup by any stretch. The story with Saquon is the same, though. Like, I feel very comfortable about Saquon Barkley because I feel like I have him nailed down. And I got flack for it a couple weeks ago because someone thought that I was calling Tommy DeVito trash. Well, I wasn't even calling him trash, but he just showed himself that he's not a starting quarterback. This guy's not leading this offense. It's Saquon Barkley led offense. That's what it is. So if he doesn't go, that offense sucks, which is what happened last week. So the fact that they're so dependent on him makes him boom or bust, because a defense like New Orleans last week realizes that, they key in on stopping him, and he's done. This week against the Philadelphia Eagles, they recognize that as well. So are you willing to take the risk? Because his upside is high. But Joe Mixon at 13, I said this on Wednesday night. I don't think that Joe Mixon's upside is really capped with Chase Brown's emergence. Chase Brown, I view him as a very valuable role player who will continue to get touches because he has proven his value to them. But I don't think it really hurts Joe Mixon that much, because the past several games, he's put up good performances. Joe Mixon getting in the end zone, 9 touchdowns this year, and he's still averaging a very healthy workload. So Joe Mixon against the Steelers, give me that matchup, because the Steelers are abysmal and getting even worse. Travis Etienne and Isaiah Pacheco and Josh Jacobs, 14 through 16. Etienne taking on the Buccaneers in Tampa, Pacheco taking on the Raiders, and Jacobs taking on Kansas City. Etienne just continues to drop. I mean, he's dropping for me, because a player I was big on all year, dating back to May, was big on Etienne this year. It started out great, but it has not been good the past month. And I really do think it has a lot to do with him not being healthy. I don't think he's fully healthy. And I think you can kind of see that in the workload they're giving him lately. They're not giving him the same workload. Last week, he took me out of a best ball team. Didn't advance because he did not put up the points I needed. Obviously, the matchup this week is way better. But Etienne, I simply can't trust him right now, because his upside is about almost cut in half, as opposed to what it was at the beginning half of the season. And then Pacheco and Jacobs, they're obviously both injured players. Depends on if they play. What I have seen on both of them is they look like they're both going to play this week. Great. That's a great story. I don't know who I prefer here. I put Pacheco above Jacobs, but I can honestly see Jacobs having a better week, because at least we know Jacobs handles the volume when he's there. 20 plus touches per game. Pacheco, it's like, I think he's very important to this offense, but what are the chances that he comes back and they're like, we want to kind of use you a little bit more sparingly, give more touches to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had a very good game last week against the Patriots. Do the same thing with Jerick McKinnon. So I worry about Pacheco's workload a little bit more. I think his upside is higher because he's more efficient. But I do think that these guys are back-to-back. Take your pick on this one. Tony Pollard and Jonathan Taylor. Yes, Jonathan Taylor, the return at 17 and 18. Pollard at Miami this week. Jonathan Taylor at Atlanta this week. Pollard is the story kind of similar with him too, where it's like, yes, he's handling the majority of the workload out of this backfield, but touchdowns have not been there. 5 touchdowns this year. And week to week, like, he could either hit his floor, which is about 6 to 8 fantasy points depending on the format, or he could hit his ceiling, which is about 20 points, which that's a good ceiling, but it's not what we once saw last year with Tony Pollard. So Tony Pollard, his upside just isn't high enough for me to rank him really much past, 15 range. So against the Dolphins, high scoring potential for sure, but I don't feel comfortable putting Pollard above guys like Jacobs and Pacheco because I don't think he has that kind of upside. And then Jonathan Taylor, with the return of him, I know we're going to have people who want to play him this week. I say you could do that, but proceed with caution. Because this was my problem originally when he got hurt. I was like, what are the chances that if he hits the best case scenario, which is he comes back week 16, what are the chances that he comes in right away and just establishes dominance again? Zach Moss, who had a great beginning of the season without Jonathan Taylor, he came back in the lineup a couple weeks ago. He was abysmal the whole time. Except for last week against the Steelers when he got in the end zone and he got hurt on the same play and we didn't see him again. So I don't really buy this notion that he's going to come back right, and just dominate right away. He's obviously a better player than Zach Moss, but I do have my issues with him this week. Breece Hall and Javante Williams at 19 and 20. Breece Hall, man. Breece Hall this week taking on the Commanders and Javante taking on the New England Patriots. Breece Hall is very much a week-to-week guy. I mean, there's no guarantee he's going to hit that upside. And I remember kind of ranking him around this range for several weeks. And people kept telling me in the comments, and I kept saying, his floor is low, but his ceiling is sky high. Even on this bad offense, it's about 30 points. And people kept telling me, you're wrong about his floor. His floor is not low. Last week proved my point. This guy has a low floor because of the offense he's on, not because he's a bad player. Look at what happened last week. 12 yards on 6 carries. And if he doesn't get that receiving upside, it's not there. And it wasn't there last week. That's why I have a problem with Breece Hall. I love the player. I've said this all year. I love the player, and his upside remains very high, but his floor remains very, very low. Against the Commanders this week, love the matchup, but this Jets team worries me big time. I think they're in a tailspin. And Breece Hall, by the way, not happy. Javante Williams at 20 against the Patriots. Matchup, I like it, but just look at the numbers on the screen. He's not fooling anybody right now. This guy just doesn't have the juice this year. 3.7 yards per carry, 3 total touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, 9.4 fantasy points per game. So even if he gets 17 touches per game through attempts, rushing, and targets, the upside just isn't really there right now with Javante. That's why he's at 20. Swift, DeAndre, and James Conner at 21 and 22. DeAndre Swift taking on the Giants, and James Conner taking on the Chicago Bears. I'll tell you what, DeAndre Swift was one of the biggest fallers for me on this list. And we're about to get to the next biggest faller on this list as well, because I just don't have a lot of faith in Swift right now. I've got very little confidence. I will say what he did in week 15, about 75 yards on the ground, was encouraging. I was encouraged by that. So maybe against an opponent that they should beat, he gets, back into 20-point territory. I need to see it to believe it first. This Eagles team looks off right now, and they're abandoning the run in most of the past several weeks. James Conner at 22 continues to exceed expectations for me personally. I feel like I've got him nailed, and then he comes out and has a big game, and then I want to rank him higher because he has the big game, and he has a bad game. So James Conner is hard to figure out. James Conner, high upside play. I would say about the same upside as Swift with a just as low floor. They're very similar to me because James Conner's problem, bad team. So even with him doing great last couple weeks, he's just now starting to get those touchdowns again. So James Conner against the Bears, I don't love this matchup. I think he could get stifled, but I said that last week against the 49ers, and look what he did. He had a great game. So James Conner, high upside play. Austin Eckler lands at 23. Austin Ekeler this week taking on... Austin Ekeler's taking on the Bills. I hate the matchup. There's no secret about it. And Austin Ekeler now is officially not trustable. No trust in Austin Ekeler at all right now. It's disgusting, honestly. It's a disgusting team, and I have no confidence in this guy whatsoever right now. Someone asked me if they should drop them. I would not go that far. I would not go far enough to say I would drop him. But what I will say is I cannot trust him, and he is nothing more than a low-end RB2 right now for me. Ty Chandler and Devin Singletary. The two other good stuff from last week that were overshadowed by James Cook. Ty Chandler and the Minnesota Vikings this week taking on the Detroit Lions, and Devin Singletary taking on the Cleveland Browns. So, Ty Chandler, the reason he's ranked ahead of Devin Singletary this week is because I do think that the upside with the matchup versus Detroit is better. It comes down to matchup. I don't like Cleveland matchup. I like Detroit matchup. But Ty Chandler, I said it on my Wednesday night live stream. I'm worried about Ty Chandler. I am definitely worried about it because if Alexander Mattison comes back, what's to say that they give a very similar workload to what they've been giving with both of them? Both of them get around 10 to 12 touches and nobody gets the chance to have real upside. That's what I worry about. If he's by himself again, he's going to rise up these rankings. We're just going to have to wait to see because I like the matchup. All that separates him from being a top 20 to 15 back this week is Alexander Mattison's presence. Devin Singletary, the thing I like over him, the thing I like about him over Ty Chandler is the fact that I believe his workload is stable. He came out last week and dominated in touches, and Dameon Pierce was erased from the game plan entirely. He disappeared, and I don't think he's coming back. Devin Singletary has flat out been better than Dameon Pierce has this year. That's a fact. So Devin Singletary, I actually trust his workload better than Ty Chandler, but I don't trust the matchup, which is why he's at 25. But make no mistake, they're both high upside plays too. Derrick Henry at 26 and Aaron Jones at 27. I've got very little to no confidence in either of these guys either. Derrick Henry taking on the Seahawks, and Aaron Jones this week taking on the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. What's a shame about both these guys is that obviously they both, used to be fantasy superstars, right? They're just reaching that age where it's like, okay, it happens to everybody. What's a shame though is that the past, Derrick Henry had a golden opportunity last week, and he was an embarrassment. I mean, it was really embarrassing what he was able to do. Derrick Henry, I'm not saying that it's all on him. I think their offensive line is awful, tragically bad. But Derrick Henry, that leaves me to believe that I can't trust his upside week to week. I think that his upside still is relatively high, but I can't trust his floor. Better stated that way. That's why his floor is bringing him down to number 26 this week against the Seahawks. And Aaron Jones, the crappy part about this is that the matchup is so tremendous, but I can't trust him. I can't trust Aaron Jones yet. I said it on Monday night in my What I Got Right and Wrong live stream. I view Aaron Jones this week at the time as a wild card because of the matchup. But I looked back at what he did last week, and I still can't fully buy into the fact that they want to give this guy a bunch of work. And without a lot of work, he hasn't been that efficient. 3.8 yards per carry, not getting in the end zone, been injured all season. I can't trust Aaron Jones, and can't tell my audience to trust him either. Zeke Elliott, Gus Edwards, and Brian Robinson Jr. rounding it out in the top 30. Zeke at 28, taking on the Broncos in Denver. Yuck. Gus Edwards this week at 29, taking on the San Francisco 49ers in San Fran. Not good. And Brian Robinson Jr. at 30 this week. And Brian Robinson Jr. is taking on the Jets. Not bad. But here's the thing, is that all three of these guys have their own unique issue. Zeke, the workload's not the issue. The team is the issue. You saw it last week. That big week he had against the Steelers was more of an indictment on how bad they are than how good Zeke still is. Because let's be honest, he is not efficient. His efficiency numbers are actually dropping. Zeke, I have a problem with. The matchup is not good this week either. Gus Edwards, out of necessity, his opportunities are going to go up, which is why he's back inside the top 30. But at most, we're looking at 16 carries this week and absolutely no upside for targets whatsoever. So we're basically banking on him getting in the end zone for a decent week, and I can't do that against the 49ers. But the workload is what brings him back inside the top 30. And Brian Robinson Jr. totally dependent on if he plays. If he plays, he's going to go a couple spots higher. But Brian Robinson Jr., make no mistake, workload unstable, team unstable, matchup potentially unstable, potentially good. Brian Robinson Jr., I can't trust him either. And as I do at the end of every single ranking video, I give you my favorite running back underdog flex option of the week. And this particular week, you know, running backs are harder to do than wide receivers because they don't, if you're a backup, you just don't have as much upside to hit, you know, a massive game. The only one I really feel that way could do it is Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals this week, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. So obviously he's made a name for himself over the past several weeks. Chase Brown, late round draft pick out of the University of Illinois. In my 2023 Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide, actually had a lot of good things to say about him. Actually, embarrassingly, I had him ranked above Etienne. I like Chase Brown. I think he's a good player, and he's proving that with Cincinnati. So against the failing Pittsburgh Steelers defense, not just offense, defense, by the way, Chase Brown, if he gets 12 touches in this game, I like his chances of hitting a big play, which is why he's my running back underdog flex play of the week. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for week 16 fantasy football. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 16 fantasy football, click on this video right here.